In our fireside chat, Professor Jason Pomeroy, founding principal of Pomeroy Studio and Pomeroy Academy, will sit down with journalist Begoña Lucena, director of boutique reputation management consultancy Artemis Associates, to talk about achieving carbon negative design.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another exciting session of the PropertyGuru Asia Real Estate Summit 2020. For the next 30 minutes, we are going to dig deeper into the world of the sustainable architecture and how it can benefit people's life. We also try to test some of the myths around the carbon negative design and whether we are or not on the right path. To talk about all of this, we have Professor Jason Pomeroy, founding principal of Singapore-based Pomeroy Studio and Pomeroy Academy, a sustainable education provider. Mr. Pomeroy is also a winning award architect, an entrepreneur, an academic, an author of various books, and TV host. And I should say, above all, he is an advocate of sustainability. Jason Pomeroy, welcome to ARES 2020.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining to ARES and this session. What a year.
Tell me about it.
We are living unprecedented times, and although I would not like to go too much into detail, I don't think we can start talking about architecture or sustainable living without asking how you have been living the COVID-19 pandemic at a personal and a professional level. And for someone who is used to travel 3 times a week, it must have been torture.
Yes, I mean, let's address the elephant in the room, really. I mean, it was, for me, torture. I was so used to traveling on a weekly basis, and that could be within Southeast Asia, or it would be to the Middle East, or it could be to Europe, and arguably, I guess I offset my carbon footprint by the green designs that I'm doing at a city scale, or a building scale, or an interior scale. But it has been a tremendous learning journey to be able to apply technology wisely in order to be able to still execute, the green works that we do. And if anything, it's been a humbling experience, because I'm so used to getting out the pens and actually doing, the sketches and so on and so forth. But to suddenly be using technology to try and be the means of communicating with the team and further afield, all of a sudden you are paradoxically drawn closer together. So it has been an interesting experience. And I would also say that looking at my interior space at home, all of a sudden that home was also the office, that home was also the school, that home was also the clinic. And so it brings to mind the importance of adaptability and resilience. And arguably, we as humans are incredibly resilient. We've been through so many pandemics in the past, as well as the built environment being so resilient. And ultimately, I think that there will be changes, but it's not going to be changing our cities that much. And I think we just got to get our minds around the idea that if we looked at the global pandemics that have taken place over the last 800 years or so, you've got the bubonic plague in the 14th century, you had the cholera pandemic of the 19th century, you had the Spanish influenza of the 20th century. There have always been pandemics, but has it stopped the wave of progression, city growth, population increase? It hasn't.
I guess the novelty for all of us is this is the first pandemic that we are all experiencing and suffering. Has in any case changed your views on the way we live and work?
Yeah, it has. I mean, I would say that there have been these 3 Ds. The first D is kind of disinfect. I mean, we're living this prophylactic lifestyle where we're having to kind of put on face masks or sanitize our hands, or have the QR codes to scan in and out. And this element of disinfection has been the first layer of disruption. then you've got this whole notion of de-densification, having a lot more space within the city or within the office to try and keep a distance. And then finally, you've got this whole notion of decentralizing and considering how we might want to move out of the city. But to be honest, I think that this is just a mere blip. I think there are going to be changes in the future where we will return to a normal. I think that in terms of real estate, it will be a fallacy to think that we can continue living in such a de-densified manner where we've got so much space kind of hovering around us. The real estate economics would just not stack up, and I don't believe it's the death of the city. We have always flocked to cities for trade, for commerce, for, you know, our own aspirations that living in a city is actually a point of arrival. For us to undo centuries of growth because of one pandemic, I don't think is going to happen. So I'm still remaining quite positive that this is a blip in time and that we will be able to kind of see the continued growth of our cities.
You mentioned recently in an interview that we should all take the COVID-19 pandemic as a call from Mother Nature.
Yes.
And something that I find very interesting, and you open the discussion, and let me read your own words, on how striking a more environmentally sensitive balance become the new norm as opposed to be a default setting by virtue of industry currently being in a state of lockdown. Are you still, standing by that?
Of course, yes. I mean, I think that I would reiterate the point that the pandemic is undoubtedly a terrible cataclysm that is affecting our worldwide population. But at the same time, we cannot lose sight of the fact that the methods that we're taking now to try and overcome the pandemic is exactly the same measures that we took back in the 14th century, the 19th century, the 20th century, which is ultimately keep a distance, be sanitized, just make sure that we can track those who have and those who do not have the pandemic. And with these sort of simple measures that then become normal protocol, we should be able to continue with our day-to-day lives and not be hampered by the pandemic. And hopefully when people realize that ultimately it's about, cleanliness, then I think that we can be living a better, more robust and resilient life. We can be getting back to creating those places and spaces that people can enjoy.
If we stop for one moment and look at the projects that have defined your career so far and the upcoming projects that you have, sustainability is at the core, all of them. Yeah. Why is this so important?
I don't know. I mean, maybe when I was an 8-year-old child, I liked crawling around in my parents' back garden and playing with the creepy crawlies. I guess that I had the privilege of growing up in a nice home in London with a back garden, and my early foray into architecture, I guess, was building wigwam tents and playing cowboys and Indians with my friends, and that was my kind of early structures that I would, basically create using my mother's bedsheet and just laying it over bits of timber and whatever, and just digging around the plants or the weeds. And my mother won't like that I say that they're weeds, but I was just fascinated with nature. And I guess the ability to combine that fascination with nature with architecture, which was this moment of calling when I went to St. Paul's Cathedral when I was 8 years old with my father, has kind of left this indelible mark. And so when I went through my university education, it was always about trying to find this symbiosis between landscape, nature and architecture. And this was way before sustainability was called sustainability. I mean, for me, it was just pure frugality. I wanted to create buildings that were really optimizing space, and I enjoyed creating small spaces that would be optimizing the people's use of these things like a machine, and I wanted to incorporate greenery and really try and push the boundaries of whatever I was touching. And so I guess sustainability to what we know it today was something that was deeply rooted even in my student work at university. It was just not called sustainability then. And the problem is this: we always get caught up in labels. Sustainability, smart, the smart city movement. I mean, I did a TV series on smart cities, and the major question was, what's a smart city? Because there are so many different characteristics and I guess positions and definitions of smartness or sustainability or green.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'd rather just think about it from a point of view of how can we save water, how can we save energy, how can we use locally sourced materials, how can we effectively shape the built environment to enhance people's lives.
Well, I'm sure that 8 years old is still within you, but I'm also sure that the designing process has become more sophisticated than then. How does it start for you, and what are the primary considerations to make something sustainable?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's interesting. I'm teaching a module at Cambridge University at the moment, and I'm trying to highlight that in order for you to create a sustainable product, whether that's, I don't know, let's just say a sustainable toothbrush or a sustainable city or a building or a glass, you need to have a sustainable process or a sustainable system in place in order to be able to deliver that product. And ultimately, it's about trying to reduce waste and try to optimize your efficiencies. So ultimately, we're a very, very process-driven firm. No matter what we design, it goes through this rigorous process of testing. We're a very evidence-based studio. I don't necessarily like the idea of me picking up a black pen, doing a pretty picture and saying, wow, look how great this looks, and trying to convince you as the client that it's brilliant just because I tell you it's brilliant. I'd far rather use evidence and science to be able to say the reason this works is because we can reduce energy consumption, water consumption, enhance the airflow, reduce the carbon footprint by using particular materials. And so the evidence-based approach that is underpinned by our rigorous Sherlock Holmesian questioning, you know how Sherlock Holmes always seems to find who the murderer is or who the suspect is by this level of interrogation. That's what we go through. And that level of interrogation covers 6 broad principles: social principles, economic principles, environmental principles, which everybody knows as being the triple bottom line of sustainability. But we go further to also think about culture, space, and technology. Because when you think about it, culture in an age of globalization should be protected, preserved. Where are you from?
I'm from Spain.
There you go. So what does it mean to be Spanish? How can we ensure that we can preserve cultural identity as opposed to being kind of consumed by global brands? Spatial sustainability. We can't possibly have a conversation amongst ourselves here on this lovely couch in this lovely space without thinking about the space. Our social sustainability, our social interactions need spaces like these for us to be able to have a discourse. So the ability to preserve space for society's social interaction is so important. And then technological sustainability, the ability to use technology to enhance our lives and not alienate ourselves. So whatever the technology is, it should be good for the 7-year-old child all the way through to the 70-year-old grandparent. So with these questions that we ask of our designs, that's where we get to a position where we can be thought leaders in sustainability.
So it's a really holistic approach and facts-driven.
Very driven, very facts-driven, very holistic. Yeah.
What do you consider was your first eco-friendly project?
Oh my goodness. Well...
And I'm not talking about that Indian Western play bed from your childhood.
I can imagine, when I was at university, there was this nomadic artist's dwelling that I had to create for my master's degree course. And I would say that was probably my first real serious consideration of modular construction and reducing energy and water consumption and reusing this old port within Amsterdam. And so that was kind of a pivotal point, because honestly, I thought I was going to fail. I honestly thought I was going to fail this particular course. And so I remember after I did the presentation, I was looking at the bottom of the list of all the students, and I'm thinking, where am I? Where am I? If I'm not even at the bottom, I must have failed. And then somebody slapped me on the back and said, oh, look, your name is at the top. And I thought, I'm onto something. This process that I've been through, this level of inquisition, this science-based element, I think I'm onto something here. And so I tried it on the next project, and the next, and the next. And I eventually, graduated with distinction, and I got into a good architecture practice, and I never looked back from there. So there have always been these really interesting green projects. I've only been focused on green projects. But if I was to kind of say that there was a pivotal point, I think it was the Idea House, because that was the vehicle for me to not only create the first zero carbon house in Asia, but it also provided a platform to consider TV. It also provided me a chance to write my first book. And that obviously then unleashed a new monster. I've just completed my 5th book now, and I'm sure I'm going to get in trouble with the family if I even mention the 6th book. In terms of TV, that has been a very different avenue. But I guess its starting point was that particular project.
Now that you mentioned the Ideal House and the Bee House, when you surprised many in Singapore in 2016 with this carbon negative design, how can these award-winning design practices be replicated across Asia?
That's a really good point. And I think one of the biggest challenges is when people look at a carbon negative building and they basically think, well, hold on a second, that's going to cost more than an average building, isn't it? I said, not really. I mean, the gauntlet that was thrown down by our client was, I like the Idea House, but I want you to design me the Bee House in Singapore, and I want it for the same cost as an average home in Singapore. And so that was the perfect challenge. I mean, I thought, how can we enhance the green agenda? How can we demonstrate to the public that sustainability doesn't mean costly design, it's actually economic design? And we were able to do so. Ultimately, driving down energy consumption, water consumption, the running costs of the building, using locally sourced materials, and using solar on the roof that would generate more energy than the house can consume, was what gave us the accolades that the Bee House won. So then we thought, we can't stop here. We need to further this line of progression and development. So we thought, how can we do this for a $60,000 home? We wanted to try and challenge the affordable market. Why should people who can't afford a car or can't afford to have the air conditioning blasting out all day long, how can they still enjoy a greener lifestyle? And ultimately, if you are having difficulties with your energy bill, your water bill, and you can't afford a car, you need to be living a very sustainable life. So we created this house called Optima, which was basically the starting point for a zero carbon community, where the houses were approximately $60,000, and you also managed to have a car sharing scheme. There were solar fields that would generate enough energy to offset the demand of the individual families using their properties. And so the story goes on. I mean, from Philippines, we then applied the same in Sweden, and we want to ensure that people get the message that sustainable design is economic design, and it's still good for the planet to do so.
So carbon negative is not a myth?
It's not a myth, definitely not.
And you have touched a very important question, because I really see how can most people still believe that when we talk about sustainable design is expensive.
Yes.
You said that it's not, that it can be affordable.
Yeah.
But actually, are we aware of that? I mean, are we prepared as consumers to say, okay, I believe you, this can be possible and it's not going to cost me a fortune?
Sometimes some of the most obvious signs of sustainability are glaring at you. For instance, when I was filming in India, and I saw wonderful examples of sustainability by parents removing the dry cotton from a Johnson's diaper. The diaper was wet, but they basically opened up the diaper to salvage the dry cotton to be able to reuse. Ultimately, it's a hand-to-mouth existence, and they had to go through these measures to be able to kind of sustain their everyday lives. it's unfortunate that some of the most impoverished places in the world are forced into thinking very carefully about reducing, reusing and recycling whatever they have purely to survive. It's just the privileged developed economies that we see the bells and whistles of green technology. I think it's about trying to strike that balance and to be able to bring that message to the people that there is a culture of sustainability that everybody should embrace, and that means not kind of leaving the light switched on or leaving kind of sockets plugged in and seeing kind of the loss of energy that way. The ability to optimize natural light and ventilation and just embrace the great outdoors. And these small measures can actually go far in trying to reduce one's carbon footprint. So whatever opportunity there is, I will try and bring this to a broader audience. That might be the lecture theatre for my students at Cambridge, but it might also be the TV series that I do. And so I think that these small incremental measures of trying to spread the message is very important.
And all these sustainable principles can be applied not only to houses, but to bigger projects. And I would like you to tell us a little bit more about the latest projects that have taken you to Indonesia, the Silicon Valley in Indonesia, and the Edu City as well in the country, and here in Singapore, what's going to be the most amazing and sustainable entertainment and sports hub.
Well, I mean, starting with BSD City in Indonesia, it was a privilege to be working with people like Cinemas Land, who they wanted to understand where BSD City sat within this global arena of smart cities around the world, and they'd watched the TV series and were very conscious that there are what I call 3 generations of a smart city. And so it was wonderful to engage with them to understand where BSD City was sitting. And what we can see is a wonderful aspiration in so far as the developer, aligned with the government, thought, how can we transition from a manufacturing-based economy to a more knowledge-based economy? And so it's no wonder that President Jokowi coined BSD City the Silicon Valley of Indonesia, and we're very proud and privileged to be working with people like Cinemas Land to try and get those creative juices flowing and create something of a knowledge hub that can attract those individuals and those individuals who can hopefully transform the economy. Same again with people like the developers behind Edu City, Agong Sedayu, a remarkable bunch of individuals who really have this forward-looking vision about how knowledge is the epicenter to try and transform the people's fortunes from manufacturing to more digital-based economies. And so in all of these examples, and returning to Singapore in the Kelang Alive project, which has been coined like the sports, recreation and leisure hub of Singapore, it's a privilege to be working with these forward-looking clients. Sport SG were very, very supportive of our notion of embracing cultural sustainability. And you're probably thinking, well, where does culture sit in this sort of conversation about sustainability? But what I found fascinating about the site of the Kelang precinct was that it was a former airport, or rather, should I say, an airfield. In the days of biplanes, where planes would land in different directions at a very slow speed, you'd land within this 400-meter perimeter airfield. And so what we wanted to do is reinvigorate that cultural story by bringing in this loop that would provide a means of pedestrian movement or cycle movement and ultimately enhance people's mobility. Embrace the great outdoors, go for a jog, go for a cycle around this loop, which also serves as a means of jumping off and into the various sporting activities and pavilions and events that take place within the precinct. So we're very, very proud of that, and we really enjoyed that process of design, and we continue to support them in their endeavours.
And all those projects here in Asia, the fastest growing region in the world, the most populated, and with the biggest concentration of high-density cities. How can sustainability be fit in the agenda of governments, developers, and consumers?
Wow, that's such a big question. I think that the way forward is to ensure that you don't leave it to one sphere of influence or one voice to push the green agenda. You can't rely on government to say to the people, this is how we're going to do it. And it's a top-down approach which is quite forceful. At the same time, you can't rely on the people just to basically say, we want to do X, Y, and Z because we think it's in our interest. You can't leave it on the private corporation to make a lot of money out of the green agenda. You can't leave it to the academics to just kind of keep all of their visions on paper or in reports and books and essays. It's this ability to join these four spheres of influence together. You do need the people to voice what they want, but you need academia to test some of those notions that the people offer. Once the academics can say, do you know what, this works through the proof of concept, we think this is going to be of benefit to civil society, you can then find private corporations thinking, I will invest in this, I will make some money out of this, this will be good for the city. And then finally, if the government can ratify that proof of concept and it can be good for the city, you then start to see a smart and sustainable approach to the built environment. So academia, civil society, state and private corporation all working together to create that sustainable solution. And ultimately that comes back to the point about you need a sustainable process to deliver the sustainable product.
A big challenge, especially when we are talking about countries with some of the poorest populations in the world, where, you know, for some of them, obviously, sustainability sounds very far away from the daily preoccupations. That's something that we need to recognize. But how can we be able to raise awareness of how much benefits can have a sustainable living, a sustainable design?
Well, I think that the UN Habitat Group, the United Nations, are doing remarkable work in trying to propagate the green agenda, and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which total 17, that covers everything from smart communities and cities all the way through to fighting poverty, is a good starting point. And I think that it means that governments need to be cognizant of these 17 principles, but not use it as a straitjacket. It shouldn't be there just as a checklist, but act as a prompt for thinking. And I do think that the parameters that are set out in those goals are equally applicable to the developing economies as they are to the developed economies.
You have lived and worked in many countries. Where do you think the best examples of sustainability can be found?
Sometimes it's the unsung heroes like Bandung, where you've got this incredibly creative, young, vibrant, educated population who are willing to try and make a difference by communicating through social media and trying to align their views to then move the city's economy forward. I find that really inspiring. At the same time, I look at, you know, places like Gävle in Sweden, where we designed a zero carbon development that was using cross-laminated timber and created internal vegetable farms that can sustain the community, and became a zero carbon project because of its embrace of various forms of renewable energy. I find that also inspiring. I mean, ultimately, I will go where there is work and where there is this call to do green design. We're fortunate enough to be in a position to be able to look at these different climatic zones and apply our skills to those because of the process that we go through. So whilst there might be a house style, and a lot of people kind of say, oh, we can definitely see that's a Pomeroy studio building, our approach, whether it's in Saudi Arabia or Sweden or Philippines or the UK, the approach and the process remains the same, but I think that the architecture or the city that comes out of it or the landscape can take on the local cultural flavours. And ultimately that's what we want, because we don't want to alienate civil society. We don't want them thinking, yeah, do you know what, this feels like it's been imported from Singapore. No, they need to feel comfortable with the place that we're creating.
How do you marry precisely the sense of culture and an economically affordable, sustainable future?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately that takes a lot of research. I mean, I guess I'm a bit of a fanatic. I mean, I will go away and read, you know, I'm always reading, basically. But I would basically really try and get true to the culture of the place. Recently we were working on a heritage city in Saudi Arabia, which saw us dive into history books dating back sort of 1200 years, and the ability to reinterpret the various traditions from the Najd region, the Egyptian, the Persian, and the Yemeni traditions that have somehow shaped and formed the architecture of this particular place. We kind of relish that. It's that element of evidence, so that we're not scratching our heads thinking, we've got to try and reinvent the wheel again. Because so many designers think, oh, I've got to be inventive, I've got to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to. Some of the best places and spaces have already been created. It's about reinterpreting the essence of a place to thus create a solution that is culturally sensitive. And that's where our passions really lie.
That could be a really good message, since the topic, the theme of this Ares 2020 is the spirit of innovation.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't need to look far away. It's there. We just need to reinterpret it.
You know, you've hit the nail on the head, because I wrote a book earlier this year, or end of last year, published earlier this year, called Cities of Opportunities, connecting culture and innovation. And what's so curious is that people's perception of culture is often looking to the past, time-tested rituals, traditions, events, anything to do with what might have been happening previously, historically. Whereas when we think of innovation, we think of technological advancement, looking to the future. But when you think about it, culture and innovation, they're both intrinsically linked. What we assume as being old today was very new in the past. When I look at St. Paul's Cathedral, I look at that as a beautiful Baroque building by Sir Christopher Wren. But actually, when the dome was created, everybody was looking at this as a modern structure. So I think that the interrelationship between culture and innovation has always been there. And I think that it's important for people to understand that what is innovative today will be culturally rich tomorrow, especially when you're looking back at what we're doing now in 200 years' time.
Talking about past and future, you are very much in touch with the young generations. How do you see them?
Oh my goodness, they fill me with fear and dread. I mean, seriously, it's interesting that you mentioned that I'm in touch with the young generation. I think it's...
Not that I don't believe you're young enough, but...
No, but it's so funny, because when I kind of think about my students at university, if I'm teaching at, say, King's Howard University or Cambridge or Nottingham University, I do have students who are kind of in their early 20s or mid-20s. But then I also have those students who are in their 40s and 50s who are professionals, senior managers, policymakers, and I don't know, I guess that even they can make me feel young. At the end of the day, any form of learning, any form of knowledge will always kind of instill the youthfulness in me. And so when I do teach, in particular, the mid-20s, I get enriched by their eager and thirst for knowledge. Arguably, just as I do with, leaders who are also repositioning themselves or upskilling themselves. But I think that it's important that we just don't lose sight of the fact that continuous learning makes us young. I think that as long as we have the drive to continuously teach ourselves, I think that's important. Every single day I wake up, I read something new, I want to be inspired by somebody else. And that is what I find makes me youthful.
But have your young students the trademark of being eco-friendly and sustainable? Is it inherent in them?
I think it's just natural of millennials and Gen Zs now that they have somehow been born into this culture of sustainability and the ability to lead a more sustainable and greener lifestyle that just so happens to be augmented by technology. I have to say that I have to try and get up to speed. I mean, I'm still a bit of a dinosaur when it comes to technology. I'm a bit rubbish in that respect.
Can't believe that.
No, I'm absolutely useless. So I can just about operate Zoom and Teams. And then when it comes to those sort of teaching modules online where we're using softwares like Moodle or Mural, that's when I start to scratch my head and start to panic. that's when I need help from my studio colleagues.
That's why we are holding today the first summit virtually, and it's a great experience for everyone because we can reach out and bigger audiences as well. Clearly, your projects and your passion for transmitting your knowledge are part of the same goal. Not really, you want to make an impact on the world that you live in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get out of bed in the morning thinking I've got to be on the cover of a magazine and I've got to be shouting at the top of my voice. No, I mean, I think that there is an inherent passion to try and create something that is truly deep green. And it then comes down to what are the various outlets that would allow me to do it. It just so happens that Pomeroy Studio, as the design vehicle, allows us the platform with the developers and the governments that we work with to share our skill set relating to the design of cities and buildings and landscapes. When it comes to Pomeroy Academy, that is a different outlet. The Academy is effectively a platform for educators and researchers to partner with universities, create courses, whether it's at a master's level or a capability building exercise. And so that's another forum for our engagement with the young and the old. And if I can reach into somebody's living room through, I don't know, whether it's Netflix or whether it's a TV series, where I can instill just a tiny bit of knowledge relating to reducing our carbon footprint or the culture of cities, I feel I'm doing the right thing. Do I get it right all the time? Who does? I mean, I think that we just need to be conscious that we all have our weaknesses, and my biggest weakness is time. I just don't have time to be doing so much when I want to be giving so much. And so we're quickly learning how to kind of manage that sort of time aspect, and that's also very, very important.
I would like to finish this conversation with you, going back to how I opened it. Okay. We have more countries going into the lockdown, the travel restrictions is still in place as we speak. How do you see the world?
Oh my goodness, that's a really good question. At this point in time, I do see the world in a tired state. And I think it's a tired state because we have all been physically weakened by this pandemic experience. And this is new territories for so many people and so many governments. My biggest regret is that we didn't move quick enough. And I think that if there was this kind of ability to see those four spheres of influence come together a lot quicker in terms of civil society, state, academia and government, and ensuring that the agile governance that allows us to make quick decisions, quick policies to try and fight the pandemic, I think we'd be in a better, stronger place. But like anything, you know, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I do think that, yes, there have been some terrible cataclysmic events and people have lost their lives, but we will come out of this in a stronger place. We will be more resilient. And I think that ultimately our view of sustainability will change. We've been so fixated on sustainability being about the environment. We now need to transition to think about not just the environment, but also culture, about society, and also the resilience of our society. And that comes down to issues of energy resilience and also food resilience when those lockdown times come again. They may well do come again. We're already seeing the UK in a state of lockdown. So we just need to be prepared, wiser, out of our experiences the next time round. But as I said, look at the previous pandemics, and I would say that these turn up on a 30 centimetre ruler as these 1 millimetre blips. It hasn't stopped the progress of the built environment. The built environment is resilient, and so are we. So we should take comfort in that.
Professor Jason Pomeroy, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise.
Thank you so much for joining on the session of the PropertyGuru Asia Real Estate Summit 2020, and all the best for your next projects.
Oh, thank you very much. Those were fantastic questions. Thank you. Thank you.